Tanse, hello, and welcome to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Ouellette Stonechild, and I'm super excited here today to have Justin Jacob Lewis here on the show. Justin is a fashion designer from the Samson Cree Nation and was born and raised on Treaty 6 territory in Alberta, Canada. Justin, thank you so much for being here today. If you just want to introduce yourself to the guests and maybe some things that I may be missing.
Sure. Tanse, Justin Jacob Lewis, and Sigusan Musquachis Ochinia. So Justin Jacob Lewis is my name, and I'm from Samson Cree Nation out in Musquachis, and I'm the founder, creative director of Section 35. And yeah, I've been doing my business. It's going to be 9 years in upcoming March, so about 8.5 years we've been doing this. So
congrats. I mean, I was a part of one of your first, I think, official photo shoots here in Vancouver. I was holding a skateboard. I was not skateboarding, but we were shooting some bomber jackets for Section 35. And for listeners that are unaware of what Section 35 means, could you give a little insight into what you were inspired by and what Section 35 means?
yeah, it was inspired by Section 35, which was coming from the Constitution, which recognizes and protects Indigenous and treaty rights in Canada and the legal framework, I guess. And I used to do a lot of work in communities, and I used to hear the elders talk about Section 35. And when I started doing this, I wanted something that kind of had a meaning to it. There was some undertones of like the political struggles that our communities faced, and it was something that I kept hearing, and it sounded cool for a brand. And I used to play baseball too, and so my baseball number was 35. So there was just a lot of cool things that it was just one of those things where I think it was meant to be. So
Yeah, and I feel like it's not just a name, it's bringing awareness to Section 35 of the Constitution. And one
mhm.
thing I found interesting, though, was I was actually reading about it online, and it was saying that Section 35 does not absolutely guarantee for our rights to be recognized and affirmed. They are actually more focused on recognizing them and affirming them, but not guaranteeing that they are actually abiding by them, which I found really interesting.
Yeah, I think it says that they're not defined. And so it's funny because I've had some people, kind of talk about, you know, our rights and being defined by a legal framework that doesn't belong to us, which is very valid. And, I wouldn't say that the brand is specifically trying to promote that legislation. It was just inspired by the struggle and the fight that our people had to have those rights recognized, right? So just a little clarity on that piece. I know I've had some people, I think there were lawyers too, who actually brought that to me. And I was like, dude, I'm not a lawyer. Like, you know, it is what it
Yeah.
is, but it's, there's definitely a talking point to it. And I think it's a lot, if you start getting into the legal framework and stuff, it gets really complicated. But it was just really inspired by that struggle to have our rights and to defend and protect our lands and our rights and our waters and all of those things.
And for the pieces itself, like, was street style streetwear something that you always wanted to get into, or was that something you also just happened to fall upon some inspiration online? Like, where did that come into play?
Yeah, it's just kind of how I dress every day. And it was just, I mean, we started out making t-shirts and hoodies, and it was just something that you wear every day, right? And um, just always been interested in clothes, and I dress pretty casual, so it was like streetwear is kind of how I dress, and that was just an easy segue into making those types of clothes.
And for you yourself, like, I know you grew up in Treaty 6 territory. Did you go to fashion school? Did you learn from someone else in your family? Like, how did you get involved in the fashion industry?
I didn't go to fashion school. I went to university for business, so I started working kind of in the corporate world and real estate investment and all of that type of stuff. Um, I've always liked clothes, and I was living in Southern California and working down there, and I ended up working really closely with a graphic designer, and he kind of taught me the basics of, the Adobe programs, Illustrator, Photoshop, and from there, I kind of started having an interest in graphic design just because it was something that was fun, and Like I said, I've always liked clothes, and it just kind of transitioned into, well, maybe I can design some t-shirts. And um, I think I started redesigning, like I was redrawing old hockey logos from my res back home. And so I started having them printed on t-shirts, and people were buying them, and I made some jerseys. And that it just kind of, people really resonated with it. And so I really kind of thought there wasn't a whole lot of indigenous brands like that I was aware of. I think they were all in the States. And so I just was like, well, maybe there's an opportunity to create something that resonates with our community. And that was really kind of the genesis of where I started. So I've obviously progressed a lot further than just t-shirts and hoodies, but those are kind of staples, and everybody wears them. So I always kind of start with those pieces too, right?
And could you speak a little bit about the starting process for you? Like, I know oftentimes we do see the highlight reel, and you are now very farther in your career, but what were
Yeah.
those beginning phases for you as an Indigenous entrepreneur? Did you have a business plan? Did you have a team? Like, how did you start solidifying Section 35?
I wish I had a business plan. I've learned, I've made so many mistakes along the way. And um I think I've tried to learn from them. But when I first started, it was screen printing, learning kind of how to get something, artwork, ready for a screen printer to use. And then working with the printers. And I had a business partner who had a print shop at the time. And that was, it was an easy kind of jump into the screen printing because he had a press and he had all that stuff. And so I used to go and help print t-shirts and learn how to press all that stuff. And it was very hands on, and I learned a lot just from that. Working with like blanks and suppliers, and just like the little ins that you have to learn when you start a business. The business side, obviously is we've come a long way. And like I said, I've made a ton of mistakes, and I think when I do talk to people, I think business plans are the way to go. And I'm launching a new brand next year, and so I'm doing all the things right with that one that I didn't do with this brand, just from all the lessons that I've learned. So but yeah, it's been a journey. So
And could you give listeners maybe some of those lessons that you've learned along the way? What are some of the challenges that you've faced throughout your career?
I mean, the financial is a big one when you're running a business, just planning, managing your cash flows, debt, like all of these things that you have to learn when I mean, obviously you're buying products, you're spending money before you sell it. Like there's lead times, production costs, all of those types of things that um, I didn't really take into account when I first started. And once we started to grow and we grew too fast, then you really kind of run into some of those issues. And um, like I've brought on a financial person who helps me now, who's been kind of you know a blessing for me because she's really gone through everything and helped restructure the business so it can be sustainable. And like a lot of those things I didn't think about when I started. It was just, for me, it was just kind of a passion project, and I just wanted to make cool stuff and sell it. And once you start moving into retail, and you have big POs, people are buying lots of stuff, you kind of have to learn how to manage those finances properly so you don't run into any problems. And we've had struggles, like I said, we grow too fast, and then you realize you don't have the money, or you're trying to allocate all your cash flows accordingly, and it's just, you can run into trouble really easily like that. So
Especially if you feel like you're maybe one of the first people in your family championing some of these things. I'm curious if there was like any role models or mentors that you had growing up. Like, who did you turn to when you felt like your business was at stake, or like who were you inspired by growing up?
I mean, to be honest, I didn't have
Mm.
financial role models, and that's probably, some of it. Like my parents kind of showed me a little bit about investments and stuff when I was, you know, 18 or 19. But, it's kind of one of those things when you're that age, it's like money in, money out. You spend what you got, and you don't really plan for the future. And, once I started, kind of getting heavy in the business side. And, obviously I've worked in the corporate world and, I've done a lot of stuff in the business world, but it's weird how managing, like a company that you don't own their money, you're much more careful with it. And, for me, like owning your own business, you can make all the shots, you can make all the decisions. And sometimes you don't think about like financial implications. It's just being creative, especially being a creative. Like I struggle navigating being creative and making smart business choices sometimes. And so, for me, having somebody who can guide those decision making things with me, it helps me not just do something on the spur of the moment, right? Because, when you're an artist, you have an idea, you want to do it, you want to make it come to life, and instead of planning for it. And so, it's I was lucky enough, I'm surrounded by a lot of friends who work in business, and so I had some people to lean on to, for guidance and questions and that. And, part of that was just from me working in the business world. And, you have other friends who are entrepreneurs and stuff, and you can kind of lean on them for questions like that. So
Mhm. Well, I'm glad that you started to find people to support you in your financial wellness and your long-term goals. And for younger Indigenous entrepreneurs that are maybe inspired by your work and wanting to create their own business or creating their own brand, what would your advice be if they, yeah, don't have any mentors or don't know where to start?
um there's actually, I think there's programs. A lot of times I've seen more now, there's grants and stuff for Indigenous entrepreneurs who are starting up, where they can actually access business coaching, even startup funding, like stuff like that. um and like I wasn't even thinking about that type of stuff when I started, and there's a lot of resources out there. Even in your own communities, if you're living in your reserve, like there's a lot of opportunities with funding like that and business coaching. And um, I would always recommend those types of things. There's a lot of help out there and resources, and even reaching out to an entrepreneur or somebody you look up to, like, to ask for, just to pick somebody's brain about it, right? So,
Mhm. Yeah, no, I agree. There's a lot of mentorship programs actually based in BC that I've seen
mhm.
come out of Capilano that are specific for Indigenous brands and businesses, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And on the flip side of that, coming out of the challenges, what are some highlights? Like, I know one of the highlights this year was, well, one, I own like half your collaboration with Roots. I
Yeah.
I got the jacket for those of you listening. Justin collaborated with Roots, Section 35 collaborated, and then created a capsule collection featuring a varsity jacket, a passport holder, a coin purse, a really nice bag, and then a sweater. So, could you
Yeah.
speak a little bit to that collaboration and how that came to life?
Yeah, I was actually preparing for Indigenous Fashion Arts in Toronto, and I think it was like February last year. And Sage Paul had actually reached out and just said, hey, would you be interested in doing a collection with Roots for the festival? And um, I actually had been wanting to work with Roots just because I love their Letterman coats, right? They're so nice. Like everything they put out from their leather factory is so nice. And so I kind of jumped at it, and I just, they wanted to kind of do, initially like collaborating on something that's in the collection that I was showing. And I mean, that collection was already done, but I had, some time to design something. And I think because I was already thinking about wanting to work with them, it was really an easy decision to jump into that. And we didn't have a lot of time to do it. I think there was, maybe 2 months to really design and produce sampling and get everything shot. And so I kind of basically just tucked myself away for a week and put together a design concept of everything. And then I flew out to Toronto to do like a tour of the leather factory, presented my design concepts, and then we went through all the materials, picked out all that stuff. And it kind of happened really fast. Normally, when I design, I'm like a year ahead of when it's
Mhm.
actually going to release. So it was kind of a spur of the moment thing, but Sage really championed that, and she felt like it was a good fit with us. And, it was part of the festival. So they were one of the main sponsors for the festival. And so it was kind of a cool project to do for the festival. And and just to get your foot in the door to work with them was an opportunity that I couldn't say no to. And it turned out really cool. Like I said, it was a short period of time, but I think sometimes like the coolest stuff comes out of those types of scenarios, right?
Well, and it shows other non-Indigenous people that it's possible. Like oftentimes I've been told, we need at least 2 years, which I mean, you
Yeah.
do when planning a concept, but also the fact that you got that done in what, 2 months? I mean, it
Yeah.
shows that it is possible if there are people willing to go to bat for you on the other side. And so what was that like for you? Like when collaborating with non-Indigenous brands, oftentimes we don't see the conversations that are happening behind the scenes and we don't see
Yeah.
what we're advocating for. And so what was that relationship like for you?
It was really, I mean, from the start, it was really cool. Obviously, there's lawyers that get involved, at the front end with contracts and stuff like that. But once that's out of the way, it really kind of jumps into the creative stuff. And I think the best part about why that worked, a lot of times, like big corporations have approval processes which take a long time. And like you said, 2 years. Um, but they kind of gave me creative freedom to what I was doing. I don't think they really changed too much or requested any changes to it. So that really helped kind of expedite things. And they actually they loved what I presented. And so I think we made one revision to it and that was it. And so I know most big companies don't operate like that, but I think their willingness to kind of let the artist have creative freedom was what really allowed that thing to come to life in such a short period of time. So
Well, and I think the fact that you kind of already knew the direction that you wanted and you had a very
yeah.
clear vision of what you wanted to see on the jacket. For listeners who don't know what the jacket is or looks like, it's Cree Prayer. Am I getting that correctly? I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it was like the concept of the coat was a prayer. And so like if you I mean obviously they're all sold out, but the pockets, had good grandmothers, good grandfathers, and then on the back on the collar, creator of all good things. And so that's kind of how, here at my house, that's how we start our prayer. And then, down the sleeves, it had the four directions, something that we reference and use in Cree culture. And then on the back, I used all my relations as kind of like the closer of the prayer, because that's how when we finish praying, that's kind of how we end our prayer. So it was all my relations. So the real concept of the coat was just a prayer, to the four directions and giving thanks for everything. So
Yeah, no, as soon as you were sharing that on the panel in Toronto, I bought it. It's like,
yeah.
I need this jacket because it's so much more than just a piece of clothing. And I think
Yeah.
oftentimes there's really good storytelling within Indigenous brands. And so when it comes to dreaming up a next piece of creation that you want to create, like what does that look like for you? How do you come up with those ideas?
Um, it varies a lot of times. I mean, a lot of times I have notes on my phone. Like I'll see something in every day that I'll just be like, oh, that's cool. And I'll just make a note of it. And I always kind of revisit things, and I'm inspired by the seasons and different colors or things that I just see in everyday life. And I'm usually making notes. And then, when I start a collection, a lot of times I start with a color palette. I'll see something that, like a color palette that I like, and I'll work around that. And then from there, I kind of start with concepts for designs, what's going to be the theme? Is there a theme to it? Or, stuff like that. And so it kind of happens, I wouldn't say there's a structure to it. Sometimes it's really organic. And a lot of times I'll design a piece and I'll pull it from a collection and I'll just kind of put it away in like a design bank. And sometimes those things kind of come back to life in later collections, or they'll fill a space in a collection that, I'm trying to complete, so there's a lot of different things that I pull from in everyday life. And I look back to a lot of my photos of my ancestors and stories that I hear from my family. And so a lot of it's just comes from our culture and or something that I've heard or some, family, there's all kinds of elements that kind of help me bring things
Mhm.
together, right? And I don't know how it happens specifically. It's sometimes they just kind of come together and I yeah, it's just organic a lot of times. So
Yeah, well, I've noticed also like some of your pieces have like syllabics and more ties to the language itself. And
Hmm.
why is that like indigenous, like that symbolism and connection to our culture and the language within your clothing? Like, why is that so important to you?
Um, I think for me, it's like it's your identity, right? That's where you draw from, and I grew up hearing like my dad's fluent in Cree, like all my aunties and uncles are fluent, my grandparents were fluent, so I grew up hearing the language, and I've always been told that your language is your culture, right? You lose your language and you lose your culture, and so um, that's just something that I grew up hearing, and so I always try to find ways to weave the language into what we do because it's so important to us, right? And I'm still trying to learn a lot of the language. I can speak a little bit and I can understand a little bit, but I wish I was fluent like my parents were, but that's just something that was kind of not lost, but it's still there, and so it's part of me kind of trying to reclaim that piece all the time, right? So.
Mhm. And I think like inspire others to also start maybe learning about their own languages because I feel
Hmm.
like language really, yeah, provides you like the worldview of where you come from.
Hmm.
Um, and so I know within Indigenous fashion, sometimes Indigenous designers can be put on a pedestal or like a high regard to always make sure that their clothing is sustainable, that we're thinking of the next generation. Do you have like when you're designing a piece for Section 35, are you looking for those things? Are you looking for sustainability? Are you making sure that your products are, made in Canada? What does that look like for you? And how is maybe it different than like a non-Indigenous brand?
Yeah, definitely. I think about those types of things, and um, I love what I do, but sometimes I find myself struggling with it. Making clothes, and you see all the statistics of the fashion industry, and it's one of the biggest polluters, and all of those things, and so I struggle with that sometimes, and we're always trying to push to make sustainable stuff, and like I think there's compromises sometimes because it's so expensive to make everything in Canada, and you look at who your core customers are, and like we could do that, but it would price out a lot of people, or otherwise I wouldn't be able to survive as a brand, so you kind of
Mhm.
have to pick and choose um where you kind of make those decisions, and you can still do stuff offshore, but it's really about finding the right people that in the factories that care about that kind of stuff, right? And there's a lot out there that don't, but there are a lot that do, and so it's I've been lucky that I've met a good network of people, and so I have friends that have they've introduced us to the right factories and places like that that actually care about those things. And so like I said, in a perfect world I'd love to do everything local, but I just don't think people would pay the price that like you seen how much the Roots collection was. It was all made, and it was expensive, and not everybody like in your the people that support the brand can afford that type of stuff, and so I'm very mindful of those types of things, and accessibility is very important, especially in our communities, and so it's kind of a fine line to walk, I think.
Mhm. Well, I'm glad that it's a part of like your thinking process when making product and being aware of those accessibility touch points when it comes to the cost.
Hmm.
Is that kind of why you were leaning to create a luxury brand? Could you speak a little bit more to your new line, Justin Jacob Lewis?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, I think Section's been doing its thing for long enough, and so it's hard to really step too far outside of what you do with that brand. And I've tested things out and just learned a lot of lessons from like what people will buy, what they won't buy, what price points are kind of like our sweet spot. And so just as I've grown as a designer, like my interest in making other stuff that wouldn't really fit in with Section 35 has grown. And so it was kind of it kind of it became apparent there needed to be something else to kind of, I guess, scratch that itch for me as a creative. And the price point's obviously higher, so it allowed me to kind of explore other types of production that cost more, that, and, not to be as worried about, the price, keeping the prices down, because it's, a lot of the stuff is going to be more expensive. It's going to be made local, and, the production methods are different, and just different things like that. And more focused, it's probably a little more refined, I think, a little bit more menswear. You'll see stuff that you can dress up and dress down. There's some tailoring and knitwear and that type of stuff, that even big trench coats, things that probably wouldn't really fit in with like the collections that I'm building with Section 35. And it's just something that I was kind of drawn to make, and I just have tried to find a way to make it happen. And the people, the people have resonated with it, I think, that have seen it. And I think it's going to bring in a different customer base, obviously, but I think there's not a lot of menswear brands from Indigenous designers out there. And it's kind of like when I started Section, there wasn't a lot out there, and so it's like, well, then I'm just going to do it myself, and try. And so we're heavy in the planning behind the scenes for a launch next fall with that. And so I've showed it a couple times. I showed some of it in Toronto. I showed some in New York last fall, but we haven't really shown like the full final collection. And so I think we just kind of finalized, there's some pieces in there that haven't been seen, and made some changes and made some pieces a little bit better, and added some things to kind of round out the collection. And so I'm really excited to see that come to life now. So
That's exciting. I feel like there comes a point in your career where you are expanding as a person. So it's almost like your brand also has to expand or like take another form. And I do think there is not enough Indigenous menswear out there. Like looking for my brothers, unless you get like something custom ordered, chances are you're probably not going to find it online.
Yeah, there isn't. And so, it's going to be cool, because I've already had people wanting me to dress them for the red carpet. I'm like, well, I'm not ready yet. Like, slow down. But yeah, I don't see a lot out there, for Indigenous designed menswear that, and, I guess it's just how I see things, and it's going to be like my take on menswear from an Indigenous lens.
So we can expect that not this fall, but next fall.
Yeah, it's like probably September 25 is
2020.
kind of,
Okay, sweet.
yeah. So
and you've mentioned this a couple of times. You mentioned showcasing it at Toronto Indigenous Fashion Arts and then in New York. Could you speak a little bit to what it's like being a part of these big events, and speak a little bit to what it was like?
I mean, Toronto, the festival in Toronto is obviously an Indigenous run festival. So, those are always really fun. There's just so many creative natives that come together. And so the energy and the vibes are, it's always just a good time. You get to see everybody, all your friends that you've met along the way. And, everybody's just excited and amped up. And, it's just one of my favorite things to do, just to be around a bunch of creatives. And so those are really fun to do. And, you get to see everybody's work, and there's just some amazing stuff that comes out of our community. And it's exciting to kind of see that. New York obviously is, like New York Fashion Week. It's not Indigenous run. Like, you're kind of out there with, the industry that's non-Indigenous. And so it's a little bit different feeling. Like, you're there, to kind of put yourself out there. And so it can be nerve-wracking and stressful. But, like the one thing that I think like every show has is like how excited people get after the show, after they see your work. And I think the shows go by so fast. You do so much work to prep for them, and then it's over in 10 minutes, and but then you have this huge, you know, feeling of accomplishment and rush, from like the reaction of everybody. And, and then you got to spend half an hour talking with people after. But it's just really cool when people appreciate your work, and, they're excited when they see what you're doing. So they both, they're both different feelings, but they're both really fun to do.
Yeah, I would imagine they would be a little bit different too, because versus showing in Toronto and in Canada in general, I feel like we have a stronger we have more of awareness when it comes to Indigenous advocacy and rights and
Yeah.
representation. And then feel like as soon as you get to the States or you go international, it's a totally different experience. And so, how has your work been received on like the world stage? Because you've also gone to Milan, right?
Yeah. It's been really positive. Like New York, obviously, like I find the Indigenous festivals we're allowed to do, like performing is such a big part of our, so dancers, you'll see dancers and stuff. But we went to New York and I brought Indigenous Enterprise with me to kind of open the show because I wanted dancers, and we kind of ran into a little bit of, like the producers were kind of mad because they were like, "What? How much time do you need?" And I'm like, "I don't know, just let them dance." And they were like, "We'll give you guys 5 minutes." And so they kind of went out and did a bit of a run through, and it was longer than 5 minutes. But the DJ who was there saw it, and he was just like, he just told them, "Just do your guys' thing. I'll just run it all." And so we kind of went off script with those guys, but it had to be done our way. And so we were very adamant. Even the models, like we brought our own models, from our own community. And so there was some things that, you know, we kind of took some chances, and just to do it our way. And they were not happy at first, but then after the show, after everybody was just blown away by it, they were like, "This is amazing. When
There
can you
for
come
it.
do another one for us?" Right. So then they were like, "We want to come,
Uh,
come do a show here." And so it's just, I don't know, we just did it our way, and it had to be that way. And um I think the most of the people at the show were not Indigenous, and it kind of showed them something they'd never seen before. And so the response was overwhelmingly positive, right? And you have people who, I made some good contacts just from people from around the world who were there, and they're like, "You got to come to London, you've got to come here." And obviously, like, I'd love to go there, but financially it's hard to travel everywhere. And
hmm.
but but just in short, like, the response has been really positive from, like, the non-Indigenous community.
Yeah, no, it seems like you've had really great experiences, and congrats on all your success so far with like collaborating with non-Indigenous people and
Yeah.
having that support. I know sometimes it can be really challenging when you're the only Indigenous person in that space advocating for things,
Yeah.
even the way that you want your show and your models to show up. So, when it comes to Indigenous fashion, like what do you hope to see within the future? Like when you think of Indigenous fashion?
um I That's a really good question, because I know what I want to see a lot of times, but I think just to see our work on the main stage, I think we deserve to be out there with these big fashion houses. Like, there's so much that our community brings to the table, and these fashion houses, they do amazing stuff, but they can't do some of the stuff that our people do, and without collaborating with us or stealing from us, right? And both of those things have happened, and you're starting to see fashion houses collaborate with native designers. They've been stealing from us for so many years. But I also believe that we don't need to collaborate with people all the time. We can do these things ourselves. And so I hope to see more of our own designers doing it themselves and getting to that place on their own without having to, kind of share that with somebody else.
Yeah, well, and it's generational. Like we've been doing this for how long? Like I every time I step foot into like unfortunately a museum, but I see the adornment that our people have worn, I'm like, this
Mhm.
is wild. Like the fact that
Yeah.
we would even have like beaded little bags for umbilical cords or like a
Yeah.
beaded like telescope holder. I was like, this we were fashionable before fashion was even a thing.
Well, that's kind of how it's funny. I got asked something along that line one time, and I just said, like, designing and dressing our people isn't something new to us. We've been doing this a long time. Like my late granny used to make my grandpa's regalia. So it mattered what our people wore, right? Whether it was like, you go to ceremony, you wear something. Whether you're going to battle, you had something. You have your regalia. Like, there was people dressing our people for a long time, and so it's not anything new. It's just, I think what we're doing is just today's version of that, right? And so
Mhm.
that's kind of how I approach what we're doing when you dress the people, right?
Mhm. And how can non-Indigenous people support Section 35 and Justin Jacob Lewis and everything that you're up to?
buy our clothes. I mean, I think the biggest thing is just supporting Indigenous designers and their work. I mean, we put our work out there for everybody, right? And I know there's been a big conversation around cultural appropriation, and it's actually kind of created a lot of awareness of it, but also in a negative way, because now non-Indigenous people are worried about wearing our clothes, and they think that buying something and wearing it from us is cultural appropriation. So you kind of, I get a lot of questions, and so you kind of have to, differentiate cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. And that's kind of how I try to simplify it for people is, if we're putting something out there that is for sale, it's for everybody. And supporting that supports independent Indigenous artists and our own economies. And that's the best way to support us. Like our stuff, share it. Like, there's so many ways to support, but if it's out there for sale, it's for everybody, right? Like, we're putting it out there, and if you like what we do and you appreciate the message and you support what we're doing, then support it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like economic reconciliation. I keep hearing this word throughout the year. I feel like
Yeah.
that is a part of it. And for listeners that are maybe like, oh, what are the pieces that I absolutely can't wear if I'm non-Indigenous? Like, what would your advice be there? Because I know for me, it's like, okay, cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation. I wouldn't want to see someone wearing like a traditional regalia or like, yeah, I don't know. For me, I was like, that's probably not something for you to wear. But
Yeah, I mean, I think in the context of like everyday clothes, like streetwear, like, it's for everybody. Obviously, regalia and those types of things, ceremonial stuff, like, that's for us. And most of us don't sell that stuff to the masses, right? Like, those are
mhm,
things you get from somebody that's in the community, and it's for specific reasons, right? So generally, I say, like, anything that's put out there that's like everyday clothing, it's for everybody. Obviously, I know there's a lot of conversation around ribbon skirts and non-Indigenous people wearing ribbon skirts, and I think everybody's kind of got their own teachings around those things, and I generally don't comment on that. Like, I think sometimes non-Indigenous people are married into communities, and
mhm.
and that's part of, from their family and who they're married into. And so it's not really my place to speak on that stuff, right? So,
I've also seen like elders gift non-Indigenous people with ribbon skirts and stuff like that. And so yeah, I'm like, that's not really my place to say what that elder can and cannot do.
yeah, totally.
Well, we actually had a lot of questions come in from listeners, but I'm gonna just pick two to choose from.
Okay.
One of them asked, how do you maintain balance between your family, your business, and your creativity?
Oh man, that's been like one of the biggest learning curves for me. And when I first started, um, it's it's funny because I'll just share. So I like recently was diagnosed with ADHD, and so it really helped me understand like my fixation on doing the things that I really like, and putting the stuff that I don't like, procrastinating and all that stuff. But when I first started, it was like design. I would just design till all hours of the morning, and and you kind of let your responsibilities elsewhere fall to the wayside. And so I've had to kind of really, and probably only more recently have I gotten better at like prioritizing self-care and family time, because I was so focused on the hustle to try and make things work as a business owner, because entrepreneurship is, it's 24/7, right? And like, when it's how you're getting paid to pay your bills, it can be stressful. And um being a dad and being a husband is, like, that has its own set of responsibilities. And so I've had to really learn how to prioritize, making time for the family. um but it's been hard. It's definitely, um I won't sugarcoat it. I've had like ups and downs through that whole process trying to figure that out. And even business, and the struggle between being creative and being business minded, trying to do something, to make money, right? When you try to force something creatively just because you need to make money, sometimes you don't put out the best things, and I've had to learn. And I design so far ahead now, like I'm working on next fall, and so that's allowed me some space to not feel rushed to try and push stuff out there with collections, just because I've kind of had to for, you know, working in the retail space. Everybody's buying a year, 6 to 8 months ahead of time, right? And so being able to design that far ahead has allowed me space to kind of manage my time better. And I stopped working on weekends. I used to work on weekends all the time, and um, being able to delegate too, like if you have help, like delegating, I always had a hard time delegating stuff to people because it's just sometimes if you want to you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. And but being able to trust people around you that are helping you has helped. So yeah, there's a whole list of things to try and find that balance. But just, for me, it was about like health, personal health, family health, and you just kind of find a way to find that balance. And so I've just made some changes in how I work and when I work, and made sure that I've prioritized some of the things that are more important than work, right? And so, and it's kind of become at a necessity, just having, so.
Well, and it's difficult. I'm resonating with a lot of the things that you're saying because I'm pretty sure I have undiagnosed ADHD as well. And so for the last couple of years, you hyper focus on your work so much, but then you realize like sometimes my brother will come into the room and be like, the room is so messy, Shayla. Like, how are you focusing right now? And you're just like, well, I'm in a flow state. Like it feels like a flow state, but everything around me is so chaotic. And then you look at yeah.
It's like that. You ever see that meme with that little girl, like, it's fine, and then in the back the house is on fire? Like
Exactly.
that's how it feels, right? And so yeah, it's helped me really understand myself, a lot better, and why I work the way I am. And like I was the same way. My office was so cluttery and racks of samples everywhere, and like it also impacts your ability to create, when you start to get overrun with some of that stuff. And so I'm trying to be a lot better at staying organized and focusing in my time and where I put my time. So
yeah, one piece of advice I got was like, you can't keep praying in a room that's like messy. Like you gotta clean up your room. Do you think the ancestors want to be chilling in a place like this? So now I'm like, okay, my prayers won't get answered unless I have like a clean environment.
that makes a lot of sense.
Right. The other two questions that I kind of just wanted to touch on is more of like something that maybe only Indigenous entrepreneurs or people within our community would understand. But one was about lateral violence when it comes to being an Indigenous entrepreneur. They were just asking for your thoughts on that, and if you had any thoughts on that. Because I know oftentimes this is happening behind the scenes, but it's not really talked about.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of stuff like that out there, and I've had the odd time you get to deal with it, but it's definitely something that exists out there. And I found early on when I started going out into the scene and stuff, there was a lot of cliques too, and I feel like there's still kind of cliques of people out there that um but I don't know, it's a tough one because it exists out there. And I think there's people have opinions and feel strongly about things, and I feel like sometimes that's not communicated correctly, and it comes out in passive aggressive and hurtful ways, right? And I think there's room for everybody. But yeah, it's something it's legit. It happens. I mean, a lot of times, sometimes I feel like when I'm putting something new out there, I'm like, I always have this like feeling of dread because I'm like, oh wait, is someone going to pop out of the woodworks? And and luckily, like for the most part, like I usually get really positive responses. But I feel like there's trolls out there too, some people who just troll. And I try to just not feed into it and ignore it, right? Because there's always going to be people that are negative, and no matter what you do, it's not going to change how they feel or how they're going to react to you. And but it's hard. You got to have tough skin, especially when you put yourself out there as an artist, or because we're human and we have feelings. And it sucks when somebody is being like that to you, right? So I try to really just choose where I put my energy, and I try not to allow like the negativity to bring me down, because it can really hurt your feelings if you do, right?
Totally.
So,
And what are the practices that kind of reclaim your connection to your spirit? Maybe if you are questioning your work or you are questioning yourself, what are rituals
yeah.
that bring you back into feeling like yourself?
I know a lot of times I'll smudge, sometimes I'll smudge just to kind of like clear that out. But I always try to remember, I'll go back to like ceremonies that I've been in and things that I've experienced in ceremonies that have kind of helped affirm, why I feel, or why I'm doing what I do, or why I feel like I'm supposed to be doing, why I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I have, a lot of things like that that I can draw on, if I need to like remember and remind myself if I'm not feeling, like some days you just don't feel right. And so I have a lot of that type of stuff. I've got a good support system too. And then, sometimes I just take a day off and unplug, and
Mm-hmm.
like I said, like that self-care, and or I'll just go hang out with the family and do something with them instead, and get your mind off of whatever it is that's bothering you. And so those are kind of some of the things that I really do. Like I just try to focus, cultural stuff really helps me kind of, it regrounds me. Sometimes I'll go home, see my family, and just stay home on the res, for a week or something, and just reground yourself. And I was home for 2 weeks, and just, I worked a little bit, but it was really just hanging out with my family and, seeing my friends from back home, and, kind of unplugging from some of these things. And that really helps me come back reinvigorated and re-inspired. And so those are kind of some of the things that I use. So
Mm-hmm. And people, I have to remind myself that that's a part of the work too, is the
mhm.
rest and the rejuvenation and restoring your nervous system to be in balance
Mhm.
with like the earth.
Yeah.
How can listeners support your work? Where can they find you? Where can they follow Section 35? Where can they buy your line? Yeah, where can we support
Yeah.
you?
We got a website, www.section35.com, and there's no numbers, it's all spelled out. You can find us on Instagram. You can find TikTok, Facebook. So our online store, we've got a store here in Chilliwack that we just opened in November, our first little retail space. So if you're in the valley out here, you can find us out here. And then there's a few retail spots out there that carry our stuff. I think Below the Belt and out in Alberta carries quite a bit. And so we're looking to try to expand to reach more people. But definitely our website's the best way to support us, buy directly from us. We try to ship quickly, and yeah, so that's the best way. And then follow us on our social media. I know Justin Jacob Lewis hasn't launched, but it will be available on a website. And then we're obviously going to be looking at finding the right partners to help launch that in some retail spaces, and we'll keep everybody updated on that stuff as well.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much, Justin, for sharing a bit about your story and the challenges and the successes that come with being an Indigenous entrepreneur. And I look forward to seeing that Justin Jacob Lewis line dropping. And also, thank you for the dope gear with your Roots collaboration.
Yeah.
I will be posting that on the blog too. So thank you so much,
Cool.
Hi, for being here.
Thanks for having me.